Emma wiped sweat from her forehead as she jabbed the shovel into the stubborn ground again. The afternoon sun beat down on her small cottage garden, making her cotton shirt stick to her back. 3 hours of work, and she had only planted 2 rose bushes out of 12. "This is impossible," she muttered, kicking the shovel with her boot. The soil was too hard, too unforgiving, just like her heart had been for the past year. She bent down and ran her fingers through the dirt, feeling its dry resistance. The garden had been the main reason she bought this cottage, a place to create beauty, to start fresh. Now it felt like another thing she couldn't handle alone. A shadow fell across her hands, and Emma looked up, squinting against the sun. A tall figure stood at her garden gate. "Looks like you're having some trouble there," the man said, his voice deep and warm like honey. He stepped closer, and Emma could see him clearly now: broad shoulders, strong arms, and eyes the color of rich soil. "The ground's too hard," Emma said, standing up and brushing dirt from her knees. "I'm trying to plant roses." The man nodded. "I'm Tom. I take care of most of the gardens around here." He extended his hand, then laughed when he saw his dirt-covered fingers. "Sorry about that." Emma shook his hand anyway. "I'm Emma, and I could use some advice if you don't mind." Tom knelt down beside the hole she'd been digging and frowned. "You need to test the soil first. See if it's ready." His hands, large and calloused, moved over the earth with gentle confidence. "May I?" Emma nodded, watching as he pushed his finger into the ground beside her half-dug hole. There was something intimate about the way he touched the earth, something that made her breath catch. "Too dry and compact," he said. "You need to soften it up first." He showed her how to mix in water and compost, working it with his hands until the soil darkened and yielded beneath his touch. Emma knelt beside him, following his lead, their shoulders occasionally brushing. "Like this?" she asked, pushing her finger into the prepared soil. "Almost." Tom's hand covered hers, guiding her finger deeper into the earth. "You want to feel for that sweet spot where it's firm but yielding." Heat that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun spread through Emma's body. Tom's palm was rough against the back of her hand, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. Together their fingers pressed into the dark soil. "There," he said softly, his breath warm against her ear. "Feel that? That's perfect." Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. It had been so long since a man had touched her, even in this innocent way. So long since she'd allowed herself to feel anything beyond the safety of numbness. Tom seemed to realize the effect he was having. He cleared his throat and moved back slightly. "Once the soil is right, the rest is easy." They worked side by side for the next hour, preparing the ground for Emma's roses. Tom taught her how to test each spot with her fingers, how to know when the earth was ready to receive the plants. His instructions were simple, but Emma found herself hanging on every word, watching the confident movement of his hands. When they finished planting the 3rd rose bush, Tom sat back on his heels and smiled at her. "You're a natural." "I had a good teacher," Emma replied, surprised by the flirtatious tone in her voice. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Tom helped Emma clean up the tools and leftover soil bags. His hand brushed against her lower back as he reached past her to collect a trowel, and Emma felt a shiver run through her body. "I should get going," Tom said, though he made no move to leave. "But I could come back tomorrow, if you want help with the rest." Emma looked at the 9 remaining rose bushes, then back at Tom's hopeful expression. The garden wasn't the only thing beginning to soften under his touch. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "I still have a lot to learn." Tom smiled, and the fading sunlight caught in his eyes. "So do I," he said, holding her gaze for a moment longer than necessary before finally turning to leave. Emma watched him walk away, her fingers absently tracing the soil under her nails. For the first time in a year, she felt something inside her stirring to life, like a seed finally finding the right conditions to grow. 3 days had passed since Tom first helped Emma in her garden. Each afternoon, he would appear at her gate just as the sun began its slow descent, tools in hand and a smile on his face. Emma found herself watching the clock, her stomach fluttering as the time for his arrival drew near. Today she wore a light sundress instead of her usual work clothes. She told herself it was because of the heat, not because of the way Tom's eyes had lingered on her the day before. "You're early," Tom said, catching her by surprise as she arranged cookies on a plate. He stood at the kitchen door she had left open to catch the breeze. Emma nearly dropped the plate. And you didn't use the front door. Sorry, he said, though his smile suggested he wasn't. I saw the garden gate open and thought you might be outside already. He looked different today. Clean jeans instead of work pants, a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hair was still damp from a shower. I made lemonade, Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady, and cookies. I thought you might be thirsty after working all day. That's thoughtful. His eyes held hers for a moment too long. But I'm not here to work on the garden today. Emma set the plate down. You're not. The roses are all planted. They just need time now. He took a step closer. I thought maybe we could do something else. Her heart skipped. Like what? There's a lake about a mile from here. Good for swimming on hot days like this. He gestured to a small bag he carried. I brought my things just in case you wanted to go. Emma hesitated. Swimming meant swimsuits, wet skin, and a level of exposure she wasn't sure she was ready for. Not with the way her body reacted to his slightest touch. I don't know if I should leave the garden, she said, though it was a weak excuse. Tom moved to the window overlooking her backyard. The garden will be fine. You've done good work. He turned back to her. But if you'd rather not? No, I want to, she said quickly. Too quickly. Let me get my things. The lake was more beautiful than Emma had imagined. Trees surrounded the clear water, their reflections creating a perfect mirror image. A small wooden dock extended from the shore. It's perfect, she said, breathing in the scent of water and pine. Local secret, Tom replied. Not many people know about it. They stood awkwardly for a moment before Tom turned away. I'll change behind those trees if you want to use that side. Emma nodded, clutching her bag. When she emerged in her plain black swimsuit, Tom was already in the water, his broad shoulders glistening wet. He dove under the surface, giving her a moment to admire the strong lines of his back before he spotted her. Water's perfect, he called. Not too cold. Emma walked to the edge of the dock, suddenly self-conscious. Tom swam closer, treading water a few feet away. You can jump, he said. I'll catch you. I don't need catching, she replied, though the thought sent a thrill through her. I know how to swim. Everyone needs catching sometimes, Emma. The way he said her name made her stomach flip. With a deep breath, she jumped, feeling the cool water close over her head. When she surfaced, Tom was right there, his hand brushing her waist to steady her. Told you it was perfect, he said softly. They swam lazily, talking about nothing important. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in months. As the afternoon waned, they drifted closer to the shore where they could stand, the water reaching just above Emma's waist. You have a leaf, Tom said, reaching to brush something from her wet hair. His hand lingered, fingers tangling gently in her damp strands. Emma's breath caught as he moved closer, water lapping between their bodies. Emma, he whispered, his free hand finding her waist beneath the water. I want to kiss you. She should step away. It was too soon. She barely knew him, but the warmth of his hand on her skin, the intensity in his eyes, they anchored her in place. Then kiss me, she whispered back. His lips were soft against hers, tentative at first, then more insistent as she responded. Her hands found his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken beneath her palm. The water moved around them, pressing their bodies closer with each subtle wave. When they finally broke apart, Emma felt dizzy, her lips tingling. Tom's eyes had darkened, his breathing uneven. I've wanted to do that since I saw you digging in that garden, he admitted, his thumb tracing her lower lip. Emma smiled, surprising herself with her boldness as she pressed closer to him. What else have you wanted to do? The morning after their swim at the lake, Emma woke to the sound of thunder. Dark clouds had gathered overnight, threatening the garden she and Tom had worked so hard to create. She rushed to the window, watching as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Her roses. They were still too new, too fragile to withstand a storm like this. Emma grabbed her raincoat and hurried outside, not bothering with an umbrella. The wind whipped her hair across her face as she knelt beside the nearest rosebush. The soil was already turning to mud, washing away from the delicate roots. No, 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 she muttered, trying to push the soil back into place with her bare hands. Rain soaked through her coat, but she didn't care. These roses were more than just plants. They represented her fresh start, her new life. Emma, a voice called through the downpour. Tom was running toward her, carrying what looked like plastic sheets and wooden stakes. Get inside, you'll catch cold. The roses, she yelled back over the howling wind. They'll wash away. Tom reached her side, dropping to his knees in the mud. I brought coverings, he shouted. Help me set them up. Together they worked frantically, hammering stakes into the ground and securing plastic shields over each rosebush. The rain beat down mercilessly, soaking them both to the skin. Emma's fingers grew numb with cold, but she kept working alongside Tom, whose shirt now clung to his chest like a second skin. Last one, Tom said, securing the final cover. Now get inside before. Emma's foot slipped in the mud as she stood. She cried out, beginning to fall backward, certain she would hit the ground hard. Instead, Tom's strong arms caught her, pulling her against his chest. For a moment, they stood frozen in the rain, her back pressed to his front, his arms wrapped tightly around her waist. I've got you, he said, his breath warm against her ear. Emma turned in his arms, meaning to thank him, but the words died in her throat. Rain streamed down Tom's face, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes, intense and focused solely on her, made her heart race. Without thinking, she reached up and brushed the wet hair from his face. We should go inside, she said, though she made no move to break away from his embrace. Tom nodded, but his hands remained on her waist, his thumbs moving in small circles that sent heat through her despite the cold rain. We should. The short walk to her cottage door felt like miles. Once inside, Emma grabbed towels from the bathroom, handing one to Tom. You're soaked through, she said, watching as he peeled off his muddy boots and socks. So are you, he replied, his eyes traveling down her body in a way that made her suddenly aware of how her wet clothes revealed every curve. Emma pulled her dripping hair over one shoulder, wringing it with a towel. I should change. I'll make coffee, Tom offered, to warm us up. When Emma returned in dry clothes, her hair still damp but calmed, she found Tom standing in her kitchen, shirtless. He'd hung his wet shirt over a chair, leaving only his jeans, which rode low on his hips. The sight of his bare torso, muscled from years of physical work, made her stop in the doorway. I hope you don't mind, he said, noticing her stare. It was dripping everywhere. It's fine, Emma managed, though her mouth had gone dry. She accepted the steaming mud he offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange. They sat at her small kitchen table, the rain still pounding on the roof above. Emma wrapped her hands around the warm mug, trying not to stare at the water droplets still clinging to Tom's shoulders. Thank you, she said finally, for coming to help with the roses. Tom smiled. I was on my way here anyway when I saw the storm. You were? His eyes met hers over the rim of his coffee mug. I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday, at the lake. Heat that had nothing to do with the coffee spread through Emma's body. Neither could I. Tom set his mug down and reached across the table, his fingers gently tracing the back of her hand. Emma, I know we haven't known each other long, but there's something between us. Something I haven't felt in a very long time. His touch sent electricity up her arm. I feel it too, she admitted. It scares me a little. Why? His fingers continued their gentle exploration, moving up her wrist. Because I didn't expect it, didn't plan for it. She looked down at his hand on hers. I came here to be alone, to heal. Tom's other hand tipped her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. Sometimes the best healing happens when we're not alone. 2 weeks had passed since the storm, 2 weeks since Emma and Tom had first kissed in her rain-soaked kitchen. Those weeks had brought a new rhythm to Emma's life. Mornings were spent tending to her garden, which thrived under her careful attention. Afternoons often found Tom at her door, sometimes with gardening tools, other times with a bottle of wine or ingredients for dinner. Today was Sunday, their designated day for working together in the garden. Emma woke early, excitement fluttering in her stomach. These Sundays had become sacred to her. Hours spent with her hands in the soil, Tom by her side, teaching her about plants while sharing stories from his life. She was kneeling among the roses, which had survived the storm and now showed tiny buds of promise, when Tom's truck pulled up. He carried a box of supplies and what looked like a wicker basket. Morning, he called, his smile brightening the already sunny day. I brought something special. Emma stood, brushing dirt from her knees. What's that? First, Tom said, setting down his supplies and pulling her close. I need this. His lips found hers in a slow, lingering kiss that still made her knees weak, even after 2 weeks of similar greetings. Now he continued, picking up the basket. I thought we could have a picnic lunch after we finish with the garden. I made everything myself. Emma peeked into the basket. Bread, cheese, fruit, and a thermos that surely contained Tom's homemade lemonade. It looks perfect. They worked side by side through the morning, planting new herbs along the garden's edge. Emma loved watching Tom's hands as he worked, strong and capable, yet surprisingly gentle with the delicate seedlings. Those same hands had explored her body with equal care during their evenings together, finding places that made her gasp and arch against him. What are you thinking about? Tom asked, catching her staring at him. Emma blushed. Nothing. Doesn't look like nothing. He moved closer, his gardening forgotten. You're all flushed. It's hot today, she said, though they both knew that wasn't the cause. Tom's finger traced her cheek. Maybe we should take a break. Have that picnic. They spread the blanket under the large oak tree at the edge of her property. Emma sat between Tom's legs, her back against his chest as they ate. His fingers occasionally brushed her neck or played with her hair, each touch sending warmth through her body. The garden is really coming together, Tom said, his breath warm against her ear. You've created something beautiful here. Emma leaned back, feeling the solid strength of him behind her. We created it together. No, he said softly. This was always your vision. I just helped with the details. She turned to face him, setting aside her half-eaten sandwich. You did more than that. Her hand found his cheek. You showed me how to make things grow again. Tom's eyes darkened with emotion. He leaned forward, capturing her lips with a hunger that took her breath away. Emma responded eagerly, her fingers threading through his hair as she pressed closer. Without breaking the kiss, Tom gently lowered her to the blanket, his body half covering hers. The weight of him felt perfect, grounding. His hand slid under the hem of her shirt, warm against her bare skin. Emma, he murmured against her neck, I want you. Here. Now. She looked up at the dappled sunlight filtering through the oak leaves, then back at Tom's face, so full of desire for her. Anyone could see us, she whispered, though her body was already responding to his touch. We're hidden by the garden wall, he said, his fingers tracing patterns on her stomach, and there's no one around for miles. His hand moved higher, cupping her breast through the thin fabric of her bra. Emma arched into his touch, her own hands pulling him closer. Are you sure? He asked, his thumb brushing over her hardened nipple. Yes, she breathed, any hesitation melting under the heat of his touch. Tom's kisses grew more intense, more demanding as his hands explored her body with increasing boldness. The picnic lay forgotten beside them as clothing was slowly, reverently removed. When they were finally skin to skin, Tom paused, looking down at Emma with wonder. You're so beautiful, he said, the sunlight catching the gold flecks in his eyes. Emma felt none of the shyness she had expected. Instead, she felt powerful, desired. Her hands traced the muscles of his back, urging him closer. Show me, she whispered. Their bodies joined there on the blanket beneath the oak tree, surrounded by the garden they had built together. Each movement was slow, deliberate. Tom watching her face carefully, learning what brought her pleasure, adapting to her responses. Summer was in full bloom, and so was Emma's garden. The roses had opened into magnificent blooms, their sweet scent filling the air. Emma spent her morning watering them, thinking about Tom. He had been away for 3 days, working on a big landscaping project in the next town. She missed him more than she wanted to admit. Her phone chimed with a message. Tom. Be back this afternoon. Can't wait to see you. Emma smiled, typing back, Garden misses you, so do I. She continued her work, planning a special dinner for his return. The past month with Tom had been like something from a dream, passionate nights, peaceful mornings, and a growing connection that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. The sound of a car pulling up made Emma look up from her gardening, but it wasn't Tom's familiar truck. This car was sleek and black, expensive-looking. Her stomach tightened as the driver stepped out. Hello, Emma. Michael, her ex, the man she had left behind in the city, along with her old life. What are you doing here? Emma asked, standing up and brushing dirt from her hands. She was suddenly very aware of her messy hair and dirt-stained clothes. Michael looked out of place in his tailored suit and polished shoes. "You're a hard woman to find," he said, walking toward her. "You didn't leave a forwarding address." "That was on purpose," Emma replied coldly. "How did you find me?" "Your mother told me." He had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "I told her I needed to return some of your things." Emma crossed her arms. "And do you have things of mine?" "Just this." Michael pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I was going to give it to you the night you left, before you told me you needed space." Emma stared at the box, recognizing it for what it was. "Michael, just hear me out," he interrupted, taking another step closer. "I know I messed up. I took you for granted, but these past few months without you have been hell." His eyes pleaded with her. "I'm different now. I've changed." Emma shook her head. "People don't change that quickly. Some do. When they lose something irreplaceable." Michael opened the box, revealing a diamond ring that caught the sunlight. "Come home, Emma, marry me. I'll give you everything you want." "I already have what I want," Emma said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I'm happy here." Michael looked around at the small cottage, the garden. "In this place? Playing farmer?" He sighed. "This isn't you, Emma. You belong in the city, at gallery openings and nice restaurants. With me." Emma was about to respond when she saw Tom's truck pull up behind Michael's car. Her heart sank. Tom stepped out, a bunch of wildflowers in his hand. He stopped when he saw Michael, his body tensing. "Tom," Emma called out, moving toward him. "You're back early." "Finished the job sooner than expected," Tom said, his eyes fixed on Michael. "Wanted to surprise you." Michael turned, looking Tom up and down with barely disguised contempt. "And you are?" "Tom Harper," he answered, stepping forward and extending his hand. "Emma's neighbor. And friend." The way Tom said friend made Emma wince. There was uncertainty in his voice, a question. Michael shook Tom's hand briefly. "Michael Reeves. Emma's fiancé." "Ex-fiancé," Emma corrected sharply. "We were never engaged, Michael." "But we could be." Michael held up the ring box. "That's why I'm here?" Tom's face hardened as he looked between Emma and Michael. The wildflowers hung limply at his side. "I should go," he said quietly. "Let you two talk." "Tom, no," Emma said, reaching for him. "It's not what you think." But Tom was already backing away. "Call me later," he said, though his eyes told a different story. He didn't believe there would be a later. Emma watched helplessly as Tom got back in his truck. He drove away without looking back, the wildflowers left forgotten on the ground. "Well," Michael said, breaking the silence. "He seems nice." Emma turned to him, anger replacing her shock. "You had no right to come here. No right to call yourself my fiancé." "I saw how he looked at you," Michael said, closing the ring box and putting it back in his pocket. "And how you looked at him. Is he the reason you're hiding out here?" "I'm not hiding, I'm living." Emma's voice grew stronger. "And no, Tom isn't why I left. You are. Your controlling behavior, your dismissal of my dreams as silly hobbies." Michael reached for her hand. "I told you, I've changed. I can prove it to you." Emma pulled away. "I don't want you to prove anything. I want you to leave." "At least think about it," Michael pleaded. "I'm staying at the inn in town for a few days. We could have dinner, talk about old times." Emma looked in the direction Tom had driven. Her heart ached, knowing what he must be thinking. "There's nothing to talk about, Michael. Please go." 3 days had passed since Michael's unexpected visit, and Emma hadn't heard from Tom. She had called him repeatedly, left messages, even driven to his small house on the edge of town, but his truck was never there. The garden, once a place of joy, now reminded her of everything she might have lost. Emma sat on her porch steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Her roses were in full bloom, but their beauty brought her no comfort. She had spent the day pulling weeds, as if removing them would somehow fix the mess her life had become. "You missed a spot." The voice made her heart skip. Tom stood at the garden gate, his hands in his pockets. He looked tired, his face unshaven, his eyes missing their usual warmth. "Tom," Emma breathed, rising to her feet. "You came back." "I never left town," he said, not moving closer. "Just needed some time to think." Emma took a step toward him. "Michael is gone. He left the day he came. Tom nodded, his face revealing nothing. Did you want him to stay? No, Emma said firmly. I told him to leave. There's nothing between us anymore. He brought a ring, Tom said, his voice rough with emotion. He called you his fiancé. He lied. Emma moved closer, stopping just short of touching him. Michael and I were together in the city. It ended badly. That's why I moved here, to start fresh. She searched his face. I never expected to meet someone like you. Tom's expression softened slightly. Why didn't you tell me about him? Because he wasn't important anymore. Emma risked touching Tom's arm. You are. Tom looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. I saw the way he looked at you, Emma, like he owned you. And for a moment, I saw doubt in your eyes. Not doubt about us, Emma insisted. Shock at seeing him here and the life I've built without him. Tom was silent for a long moment. I found this in town, he finally said, pulling a small paper from his pocket. It's a flyer for an art exhibit. Your name is on it. Emma took the paper, surprised. Where did you get this? The cafe in town. The owner said a man in a suit left a stack of them. Tom watched her face carefully. It says you're a featured artist. In a gallery opening next month, in the city. Emma stared at the flyer. Michael did this. He must have submitted my old portfolio without telling me. Is that what you want? Tom asked quietly. To go back to the city? To be an artist? Emma looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. I am an artist, Tom. I always have been. But that doesn't mean I want to leave here. She gestured to the garden. This is my home now. This is where I found myself again. Her voice lowered. Where I found you. Tom took a step closer, finally entering her space. I thought I'd lost you, he admitted, his hand coming up to touch her cheek. When I saw him standing there with that ring, I thought I never really had you at all. Emma pressed her face into his palm. You've had me since you first showed me how to test the soil with your fingers, since you taught me how to make things grow. Tom's other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him. I missed you, he whispered against her hair. These past 3 days were torture. Then why didn't you answer my calls? Emma asked, her hands clutching his shirt. Because I was afraid of what you'd say. Tom pulled back to look in her eyes. Afraid you'd choose him, choose the city and art shows and the life you had before. Emma shook her head. That life made me unhappy. Michael made me unhappy. She pressed her body closer to Tom's. You make me feel alive. Tom's lips found hers then, hungry and desperate. Emma responded with equal passion, her hands moving up to tangle in his hair. They kissed as if making up for the days apart, as if trying to prove with their bodies what words couldn't express. Tom lifted her, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her into the cottage. They didn't make it to the bedroom. The living room couch became their destination, clothes hastily removed and tossed aside. I need you, Emma gasped as Tom's mouth moved down her neck. Now. Their bodies joined with an urgency born of separation and fear. Emma clung to Tom, watching his face above her, letting him see the truth in her eyes, that this was where she belonged, with him, in this place they had made together. Afterward, they lay tangled on the couch, Emma's head on Tom's chest, listening to his heartbeat return to normal. His fingers traced patterns on her bare back. I want you to pursue your art, Tom said suddenly. If that gallery showing is something you want, you should do it. Emma raised her head to look at him. What about us? Tom smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in days. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you unless you want to. 1 year had passed since Emma first arrived at the cottage with nothing but heartbreak and empty garden beds. Now the garden was a riot of color and life. Roses climbed trellises, herbs scented the air, and vegetables grew in neat rows. Like the garden, Emma had transformed, finding strength and happiness she'd once thought impossible. It was a perfect summer day as Emma walked through her garden, checking on her plants. Tom had been strangely absent all morning, telling her he had errands to run in town. She missed him, even though they'd spent almost every night together for months now, alternating between his house and hers. Her art show in the city had been a success, with several of her paintings sold. But Emma had returned to her cottage without hesitation, finding more inspiration in her garden and countryside than she ever had in the busy city. Tom had supported her completely, even driving her to the gallery and standing proudly by her side all evening. Emma knelt to pull a stubborn weed from around her favorite rosebush, the first one she and Tom had planted together. The soil was warm beneath her fingers, alive with all the microorganisms Tom had taught her about. She smiled at the memory of his first lesson, how he had guided her finger into the earth, the chemistry that had sparked between them even then. Testing the soil? Tom's voice came from behind her. Emma turned with a smile. Just remembering how you taught me. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. Where have you been all morning? Getting something special. Tom's expression was nervous, excited. He held a small bag in his hand. What is it? Emma asked, stepping closer. Tom took a deep breath. I was going to wait until tonight, make a fancy dinner, but I can't hold on to this any longer. He reached for her hand. Come with me? Curious, Emma followed as Tom led her to the very spot where they had first met, where he had found her struggling with that initial rosebush. The plant now bloomed magnificently, its pink flowers perfuming the air. This is where everything changed for me, Tom said, his voice soft with emotion. One moment I was just walking by, the next I was falling in love with a woman covered in dirt. Emma's heart quickened. Tom. Let me finish, he said gently. This past year has been the best of my life. Every morning I wake up thinking about you, whether you're beside me or not. Every night I go to sleep grateful that I happened to walk by your garden that day. Tom took both her hands in his. I watched you turn this empty space into something beautiful. I watched you open your heart again, even though you were afraid, and I fell more in love with you every day. Emma felt tears forming in her eyes as Tom knelt down on one knee. Unlike Michael's grand gesture a year ago, this felt completely right. Tom kneeling in the garden where their love had begun, dirt on his jeans and sincerity in his eyes. I don't have a fancy ring from a jewelry store, Tom said, reaching into the bag he'd brought. But I have this. He pulled out a small wooden box, clearly handmade. When he opened it, Emma gasped. Inside was a ring unlike any she'd seen before. A delicate band of silver with tiny roses and leaves etched into the metal, a small diamond nestled among them like morning dew. I had it made by a craftsman in town, Tom explained. I wanted something that would remind you of our beginning, every time you looked at it. A tear slipped down Emma's cheek. It's perfect. Emma, Tom said, his voice slightly shaky, will you marry me? Will you keep building this life with me, growing our love like we grew this garden? Without hesitation, Emma dropped to her knees in front of him, not caring about the dirt staining her clothes. Yes, she whispered, taking his face in her hands. 1,000 times yes. Tom slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. When he stood, pulling her up with him, Emma wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him deeply. His arms encircled her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground in his excitement. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Tom pressed his forehead to hers. I've been planning this for months, he admitted. I was so nervous. Emma laughed softly. Did you think I'd say no? I hoped you wouldn't. Tom's hands slid down to her hips, pulling her closer. I couldn't imagine my life without you in it. Emma looked around at the garden they had created together, then back at the man who had helped her heart bloom again. This is just the beginning, she said, taking his hand and guiding it to her stomach. We're going to need a bigger garden. Tom's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Are you? Emma nodded, smiling through happy tears. I found out last week. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you. Emma nodded, smiling through happy tears. I found out last week. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you. Tom's joyful shout echoed across the garden as he lifted Emma and spun her around. Setting her gently back on her feet, he knelt again, this time pressing his lips to her still flat stomach. Hello in there, he whispered. Your mother and I can't wait to meet you. Standing, Tom pulled Emma into another embrace. I love you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Both of you. Emma rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. The garden around them swayed gently in the summer breeze, a living testament to what could grow when love was tended with patience and care.